In heaven, nobody sits. That is the rule, and it is very old. The angels stand. The seraphim stand, 6 wings each, covering their faces because they cannot bear to look. The armies of fire stand. Everyone who serves before the throne stands forever, because to sit in that presence would be to claim a rank that belongs to one being only. Standing is the whole posture of an angel. It is what the word almost means. There is one exception. According to a Jewish mystical text written more than 1,500 years ago, one being was given a chair, a throne of his own, set near the great throne of glory, and he was allowed to sit on it and write in a book. And when a famous rabbi climbed in a vision high enough to see who was sitting on that chair, what he saw did not simply frighten him. It ended his faith. He came back down and spent the rest of his life outside the tradition that raised him, and the sages who told his story gave him a new name. They called him a hare, the other, the one who became a stranger, because the figure he saw seated in heaven was writing in what looked like God's own ledger, and it was wearing what the text openly calls God's own name. I want to tell you who was sitting in that chair, and I want to tell you why the book that describes him was kept and copied and treasured for centuries by the very people who refused to place it in their Bible. I am a priest. This is not my tradition. It is Jewish mysticism, and I have spent a fair amount of time this month with it precisely because it is not mine, which means I owe it more care, not less. So I am going to be slow, and I am going to be accurate, and where the scholars disagree, I am going to tell you that they disagree, instead of pretending I have solved something they have not. There is a moment coming, near the end, where a single line from this book brushes so close to a second God that heaven itself, inside the story, has to step in and stop it. I will tell you when we get there. For now, hold on to the chair. Let me start by clearing away 3 things that are almost always confused, because if we do not, the rest will not make sense. There is not one book of Enoch. There are 3, and they are separated by languages, by centuries, and by entire worlds of thought. The first Enoch, is the ancient one, the Ethiopic book of the Watchers and the Flood, written in the centuries before Christ. The second Enoch, survives in Old Slavonic and takes Enoch up through the heavens. This episode is about the third Enoch. It is written in Hebrew. It comes out of a completely different movement, and it is far younger than the other 2. Scholars place its final form somewhere around the 5th or 6th century after Christ, most likely in Babylonia, though it carries older traditions inside it. The man who gave it its modern name and its first real edition was a scholar named Hugo Odeberg in 1928, and the standard English translation most people quote today was made by Philip Alexander in the 1980s. Keep those 2 names. We are going to build the whole story on the work of people like them, because in this niche, the fastest way to lie is to stop naming your sources. And here is the second thing to clear away. 3rd Enoch is not a lost gospel, and it is not a banned scripture, and it is not a spell book. It belongs to a kind of Jewish literature scholars call hekkalot, which means palaces or halls. These are texts about ascent. A sage, in deep prayer and danger, rises in vision through the heavenly halls, gate after gate, toward the chariot, the Merkavah, the throne that the prophet Ezekiel saw made of wheels and fire. This is a real, serious, devotional stream inside Judaism, studied by some of the greatest scholars of the last century, Gershom Scholem first among them. It is not the occult. It is not a seance. If you have seen the name Metatron sold on the internet next to crystals and sacred geometry and courses on how to summon an archangel, set all of that down now, gently, because it has almost nothing to do with the ancient text we are actually going to read. That modern material borrows a very old name and empties it of the fear and the reverence that gave it weight. The Metatron of 3rd Enoch is not something you contact. He is something the tradition trembled to write down. If you want to see what these mystics were straining toward, open the 1st chapter of the prophet Ezekiel and read it slowly. A storm out of the north, a vast cloud, fire folding in on itself, and inside it 4 living creatures, and wheels within wheels, their rims full of eyes. Above them a dome like ice. Above the dome a throne. And on the throne, Ezekiel says, a likeness with the appearance of a man, wrapped in fire from the waist up and from the waist down, and a brightness all around. Notice how the prophet refuses, the whole chapter long, to say plainly that he saw God. He says he saw the likeness of the appearance of the glory. Even Ezekiel keeps stacking word after word between himself and the throne, because to look straight at it is not permitted. That vision, the chariot, the Merkava, was the destination. The Hecalot mystics rose in prayer through hall after hall to approach it, and the rule about it was absolute. You do not lecture on the chariot in the open. You barely speak of it at all. So, the book opens with a guide. A rabbi named Ishmael in the text ascends into heaven, and at the highest level he is met by an angel of overwhelming rank, the prince of the divine presence, the one who stands, or rather sits, closest to the throne. And Rabbi Ishmael, awed, asks this towering being a simple question. Who are you? What is your name? Why do they call you by a small, strange title, youth, when you are the greatest of the angels? And the angel answers with the sentence that the whole book is built to deliver. He says, I am Enoch, the son of Jared. Sit with that for a moment, because it is the hinge of everything. The most exalted angel in this entire cosmos, the one on the chair, the one near the throne, the scribe of heaven, is not an angel who was created an angel. He is a man. He is the man from the 5th chapter of Genesis, the one the Bible disposes of in a single, strange verse. Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. That is all Genesis says. He walked with God, and then he was not. The book does not tell you where he went. It has haunted readers for thousands of years, that verse, because every other man in that chapter dies, and Enoch simply is taken, mid-sentence, out of the world. 3rd Enoch is one tradition's answer to the question Genesis refuses to close. Where did he go? And the answer this book gives is the boldest answer anyone ever gave. He did not just visit heaven. He was kept there, and he was changed into the being who runs it. Now I have to show you the cost of that change, because the text does not flinch from it, and neither should we. When a human being is turned into this kind of angel, according to 3rd Enoch, his body does not simply glow. It is unmade and remade as fire. The text says his flesh was turned to flame, his sinews to blazing fire, his bones to coals of juniper, his eyelashes to flashes of lightning, his eyeballs to torches, and every limb of him to wings of burning fire. He is enlarged until, the book says, he matches the world in length and in breadth. He is given a throne like the throne of glory. He is given a crown, and on the crown are set the letters by which heaven and earth were made, and they flash like lightning. He is given, the tradition says, 70 names. 70, the text says, corresponding to the 70 nations and the 70 tongues of the world, as if this one being had to be made large enough to answer for all of humanity at once. And the mystics went further, in a strand of this literature that keeps trying to measure the thing that cannot be measured. They scaled his body to the cosmos. They gave him eyes almost beyond counting, and in one reckoning the number is not random at all. His eyes are counted to the hours of the year, 8,766 of them, one for every hour there is, as if he were no longer a person, but a living clock of heaven, awake at every moment at once. On his head they set a crown, and on the crown They wrote the very letters by which, in the old belief, heaven and earth were spoken into being, and those letters flash like lightning above him. You are meant to lose your footing a little, reading this. That is the point of it. The book is straining to say what it would cost and what it would mean for a man to be enlarged into the working machinery of heaven itself. And then he is given one more name, and this is the one that changed everything, and this is the one I promised you. We are perhaps a third of the way in, and I want to mark where we are standing, because the ground is about to tilt, and I do not want you to fall off. So far, this is astonishing, but it is not dangerous. A man taken up, remade in fire, seated as the chief of the angels. Judaism can hold that. It has room for a supreme angel. What it does not have room for, what it built its entire sharpest boundary against, is a second God. And the next line walks right up to that boundary and sets its foot on the line. Because in the 12th chapter of 3rd Enoch, God places on this being a name, and the name is not humble. God calls him, the text says, the lesser YHWH, the lesser bearer of the divine name. And the book even tells you where it found the warrant for such a thing. It points back to a line in the book of Exodus, where God says of an angel he is sending, "Do not rebel against him, for my name is in him." My name is in him. The mystics read that line and drew from it a staggering conclusion. There is an angel who carries the name. And in 3rd Enoch, that angel has a human face and a human history, and it is Enoch, the son of Jared, sitting on a chair near the throne with the letters of creation blazing on his crown. I am going to keep that name small and say it rarely, because the text itself treats it as almost unbearable, and I think that is the right instinct. But you can already feel the problem. You can feel why this book could be loved and could never be safe. If there is a being who sits, who writes, who wears the name, who is called even a lesser version of the God of Israel, then a person standing at the edge of heaven and seeing him could make the oldest and most forbidden mistake in the tradition. He could think he was looking at two, which is exactly what happened to the man they called the other. And now we reach him, and I need you to understand that what I am about to describe is not from a fringe scroll. It is in the Talmud. It is in the central library of Rabbinic Judaism, in the tractate Hagigah, on the page the scholars cite as 15a. This is the tradition telling this story about itself. 4 sages, it says, entered the orchard. Pardes, the word is, the garden, which here means the dangerous height of mystical vision. 4 went up. Only 1 came home unbroken. 1 of them looked and died. 1 looked and lost his mind. Hold that framing for a second before we reach the 4th man, because it tells you how this tradition understood what it was doing. It did not imagine the vision of heaven as a warm comfort. It imagined it as the most dangerous thing a human being could attempt, a height where 1 wrong perception could kill you or shatter you, and where only the rarest soul, a Rabbi Akiva, could stand before the throne and come back down still whole. And the 4th was Elisha ben Abuya, a brilliant sage, a teacher of teachers. He went up, and at the top he saw Metatron, seated, writing down the merits of Israel in a book. Stop on that image, because the writing is the reason for the chair. This is not a decorative throne. It is a working seat. The greatest angel is doing the most human thing in the cosmos. He is keeping the books. He is the scribe of heaven, recording the good that Israel does, 1 entry at a time, the way Enoch, back in the book of Genesis traditions, was remembered as the first man who ever learned to write. The chair exists because there is a ledger, and the ledger exists because someone has to sit and keep it. And that is exactly the detail that undoes Elisha ben Abuya. He does not see an angel standing in worship. He sees one seated at work, with a pen, in the posture of authority. Seated, writing. And Elisha ben Abuya, who knew the rule as well as anyone, who knew that in heaven nobody sits, looked at that chair and drew the conclusion the whole tradition dreads. He said, perhaps, God forbid, there are two powers in heaven, two authorities, two thrones. Two. And his faith did not survive the thought. He came back down a stranger to his own religion, and the sages, unwilling even to write his name after that, called him Aher, the other. Here is the second rehook, and it is the strangest turn in the whole story, so stay with me. Because you might expect the tradition to simply delete this, to bury the book that put an angel on a chair and nearly made a second god. That is not what happened. Watch what the tradition does instead. It keeps the story, and inside the story, it corrects itself, in public, on the page. In the Talmud's own telling, to prove that Metatron is not a second power, that he is a servant and not a god, heaven acts. They bring Metatron out, and they strike him. The Aramaic is vivid, and it is exact. 60 lashes of fire. 60. The most exalted angel in the tradition, the one on the chair, is pulled off it and given 60 lashes of fire, in order to demonstrate, to Aher and to every reader who comes after, that this being can be disciplined, and therefore is not God. 3rd Enoch tells the same scene at its own 16th chapter. Aher sees the enthroned figure, cries out that there are two powers, and an angel comes and gives Metatron 60 lashes of fire and makes him stand upon his feet, makes him stand. The tradition unseats him. It takes away the chair in the very text that gave it to him, to make sure you do not misread the chair as a second throne of God. I find that one of the most honest things a religious tradition has ever done with its own dangerous material, and I want to say why, because it matters for how you hear this whole channel. A weaker tradition hides the thing it fears. This one wrote the fear directly into its holiest book of debate. It let you feel the vertigo of the seated angel wearing the name, and then it corrected the vertigo, hard, in front of you, so that the danger and the fence around the danger travel together forever. You cannot read the temptation without also reading the answer to it. That is not suppression. That is a tradition arguing with itself in the light. Now, I owe you the personal note I try to leave in every one of these, because I have been handling another faith's most delicate material for a while now, and I do not want to pretend I am neutral about that. Reading the 60 lashes, as a priest, I did not feel superior to it. I felt something closer to recognition. My own tradition spent centuries fighting over exactly this same knife edge, how a figure can bear the fullness of God and not be a second God, and it did not always fight gently. When I read the story of Aher, I am not reading something foreign. I am reading a neighbor wrestling the same angel I wrestle, in a different language, and losing sleep over the same line. Which brings us to the question this channel exists to answer without lying to you. If 3rd Enoch is this rich, this old, this treasured, this deeply woven into the tradition that even the Talmud tells its central story, then why is it not in the Bible? Why does it sit outside the canon when a book like Genesis sits inside it? And I know the answer you have been trained to expect. Someone powerful found it too dangerous. Someone locked it away. Someone decided you were not allowed to know there was an angel who wore the name. I have to tell you plainly that this is not what happened, and the real reasons are not a cover-up. They are 3, and they are quieter than the rumor. And once you see them, the whole shape of the thing makes sense. The first reason is simply time. By the era when 3rd Enoch reached its final form, the 5th or 6th century after Christ, the Hebrew Bible had been closed for centuries. The door was not slammed on this book. The door was already shut long before the book was written. You cannot be voted out of a room you were born too late to enter. To ask why 3rd Enoch is not in the Hebrew Bible is a little like asking why a cathedral built in the 15th century is not mentioned in a document sealed in the 4th. The dates alone answer it. The second reason is genre, and it is the one most people miss. 3rd Enoch is not law. It is not prophecy. It is not the national history of a people. It is hekkalot, mystical ascent literature, an esoteric and devotional kind of writing that was never meant to be public scripture in the first place. And this is the part that undoes the conspiracy theory completely. The tradition itself, in the Mishnah, in the same tractate Hagiga, lays down a rule about exactly this kind of material. The work of the chariot, the vision of the throne, may not be taught in public. It may be expounded only to a single student, and only if that student is wise enough to understand it on his own. That is not a censor hiding a text. That is a tradition telling its own members, out loud and in writing, that this material is high voltage and must be handled one careful person at a time. 3rd Enoch inherits that status. Preserved, revered, copied for centuries, and deliberately kept in the back room, not because someone feared you would learn the truth, but because the tradition feared anyone would handle it carelessly. And the third reason is the danger we already watched the tradition fight in the Talmud. 2 powers in heaven. This was a defined heresy in Rabbinic Judaism, mapped in our own time by the scholar Alan Segal in a landmark study. The idea that Scripture might imply a second divine power beside the one God. A book whose most famous image is a human enthroned, crowned, seated, writing, and called the lesser bearer of the name, is a book that lives one careless reading away from that heresy. So it could not become Scripture, could not be handed to a crowd as authoritative, precisely because taken flat and read fast, it could be mistaken for teaching too. It had to be kept with a warning label sewn into it. Preserved and fenced, loved and guarded, both at once. So the honest answer, the one I would rather give you than the thrilling one, is that nobody buried 3rd Enoch. It was written too late for the canon, in a genre that was never bound for the canon, carrying a claim so combustible that the tradition kept it under glass. Not a cover-up, a tradition being careful with the most dangerous, beautiful thing it ever made. And I want to be honest about one more thing before we close, because it is the part a lazier telling would hide from you. The scholars do not fully agree about who Metatron even is underneath all this. There is a long relay race of great minds on this question. Odeberg began it. Scholem reframed it. Segal mapped the heresy around it. Peter Schaeffer changed how we even read these texts, arguing they are more fluid than fixed books. Moshe Idel wrote an essay whose title is almost the whole thesis, Enoch is Metatron. And more recently, Daniel Boyarin reopened the entire question of where this name-bearing angel came from in the first place. They still argue. The origin of Metatron is not settled. And I think telling you that, telling you the honest edge of the map, instead of drawing a monster past it, is the difference between a channel you can trust in a year and a channel you cannot. So let me leave you where the tradition leaves you, at the chair. Picture it one more time. A throne set near the great throne, a being seated on it who was once a man named Enoch, who walked with God and was not, and who was taken up and remade in fire, and crowned with the letters of creation, and given for a moment a fragment of the unbearable name. And picture the rabbi at the top of the vision, seeing the chair, and getting it exactly wrong, and falling. And picture the tradition itself walking into its own story and pulling the figure up off the chair to make him stand, so that no one after a hair would fall the same way. The chair is still there, in the book, empty now, with the ledger open on it. And the argument about who was ever allowed to sit in it is still going, in universities and study halls, right now, tonight. That is not a loose end. That is the most alive thing a 1,500-year-old book can possibly be. There is one more removed book I have to set in front of you, and it is not about a man who was lifted into heaven. It is about a man who was taken down, alive, to see the other place. Centuries before a poet in Florence ever imagined circles of the damned, an early Christian text described hell in such specific and terrible detail that some churches read it as scripture, and then, slowly, decided they could not. It has a name, the Apocalypse of Peter, and it shows you a map that someone, long ago, decided you were better off not holding. So tonight, find the 5th chapter of Genesis and read the verse about Enoch again, the one that says he walked with God and he was not. 4 words that refuse to end the sentence. And ask yourself why, for 3,000 years, so many people could not let those 4 words alone and kept trying, book after book, to tell you where he went.